think about it, there must be a higher love down in the heart or hidden in the stars above. 'Cause without it, life is wasted time. Look inside your heart, I look inside mine. Things look so bad everywhere in this whole world.
You can feel that twang, it's okay. My country folks were like, come on, man, you've given us Stevie Winwood, some Whitney, but no country.
What could be? Bring me a higher love. Bring me a higher love. Oh, bring me a higher love. Is that?
For those of you who are in the room for the first time and you're like, we're not sure what's happening right now, for the last 2 months, we started every Sunday by just rolling those words out, higher love. Think about it. Think about it. That's how it starts. Something about life's just not working out. It's complicated, it's complex, and sure, we have moments of hope, and we have moments of encouragement. We have moments where we feel like we're winning, but we look around and we go, oh, there's just a lot of hard around us. We've got these sunflowers up and around the building as a reminder to pray for the people of Russia and the people of Ukraine as this crisis there continues. And that's just one snapshot across the globe. There's also what's happening right in your life day in and day out. And higher love has been an exploration of the book of Philippians. It's a book written a few thousand years ago, but it's a letter, and we treat it like a letter. It's written to a group of people trying to figure out, like, how do I thrive and how do I flourish in a world that doesn't want me to? And what does Jesus have to do with that? Now, I want to give you a cautionary tale to get things going this morning. I'm so excited that we get to celebrate Easter together because there was one day a few years back, probably about 18 years ago, I didn't think I was going to make it. So here's how it unfolded. But all the church volunteers over, and I was grilling up sausages on the grill, and grilled sausages are really good. And so I had one. That's, and two, of course. And then somebody I love said, are you sure you need 2 sausages? And this was said out of love and concern. And my direct words were, it's not like I'm going to die or something. Okay, now that was on Saturday. On Sunday, we were at a meeting with new people from the church, and we were introducing ourselves, and I started to get this pain, like this throb. It started in my shoulder. It was on this side, stretched down to my back. I'm like, what's going on? Went up to one of the nurses. They're like, we think you're having atypical heart symptoms. Like, you need to get to the emergency room now. So they don't even call the ambulance. They throw me in the car. I'm like going through shock. I'm pale. I'm sweating. I'm hot. I'm cold. My chest hurts. My back hurts. On the car, on the ride there, who's driving me to the hospital? My wife, the person who the day before said, are you sure you need 2 sausages? And I went, it's not like I'm going to die or anything. Now I'm in the car. I'm just looking out the window. And I'm feeling like, oh my goodness, I'm going to die. My kids are little. I got 4 little kids. I'm leaving this poor woman with these 4 kids. We don't have my life insurance wasn't very much. We're not going to be able to pay our house off. And all because I ate a second sausage at the staff volunteer barbecue. And I felt I'd say probably for the first time, what some people often honestly live with. I felt this crushing weight of anxiety. Think about that. I think I'm dying. Oh, I was a little stressed and I had bronchitis. So I got there, they're like, you're a good man. So I just kept my sausage thing going. Now I need to change that. But they're like, you're a good man. And as I'm looking out the window, as I'm in that seat, and I'm just looking out, and my wife's driving, I don't even want to look at her. I hope I don't die on the way there. That would scar her forever. I'm looking out the window and I'm like, the weight of the world is crashing in around me, all because of a stupid decision I made at a barbecue. And it's going to affect everybody. And there's nothing I can do to stop it. There's nothing I can do to change it. Now, I was thinking through today's message as we get into this very practical, and I'm so glad you're all here because I can picture in my mind almost like waves breaking on a shore, a picture of a group of people living in such a way, whether you've been part of Eastern for a long time or you're just in 1 week today. If you listen closely to what the Bible has to say to us today, you're going to find something that can be transformational. It's not a magic cure. It's not a simple solution, but it's something that speaks to that moment I was in. It's something that speaks to the moment that so many of you are living in and so many of us move in and out of, and it's the weight of the world is crashing in around us, and maybe we'll call it anxiety. Maybe we'll call it anxiety for the day. Now, I have to give an all play here. When I say anxiety, I'm not talking about something that you have been wrestling through with medical professionals and trying to figure out how to function with. Because if that's what I'm talking about, then I'm going to kind of diminish you today and say something I shouldn't say. Because that's not my area of expertise. That's not my field. That's not what I know. But I'm talking about the thing that we all experience day in and day out. And maybe it takes you to those places where you need to seek professional help, or maybe you're not even sure what to do. So when you hear anxiety today, if you're someone who comes in and anxiety is really crushing you right now, please don't hear me like diminishing it as just do this and you'll be fine. At the same time, I want to hear what this Philippians letter will have to say to you and me. Now, so with that in mind, I want to jump in, and to prepare for this message, I took a look at, I'll give it a second, trying something new today. Okay, I took a look at what's happening in America with stress. Now, this went back to only 2020, but it was a look at, in the emergence of the pandemic, what was happening in your heart and in my heart. What was taking place with us? Because something in pharmaceuticals was on the rise. Antidepressants, anti-anxiety, sleep, and antacid medications were skyrocketing. They were topping the list of things that you and I needed to make it from one day to another. And maybe it was prescribed, or maybe it's just pulling Tums off the shelf at the grocery store, but our physiological system was not firing properly. Things were disconnected, things were malfunctioning. And as the American Psychological Association looked across almost 30,000 people through phone interviews, this is what they found. Anxiety levels were through the roof. 20% of adults said, my mental health is significantly worse than it was a year ago. My mental health, it's crashing. That number was higher among our youngest generation. Well, that's Gen Z was saying it's almost 40%. It's almost 40%. Now, what's interesting is the silent generation, our oldest seniors, said it's 10%. So it's something about the tools and the experience and the life they've lived in the same world and everything crashing down, but the anxiety hit them differently. 7 in 10 adults felt so tired in the past week that they did, let me fill in some of the behaviors, sat around and did nothing and felt nothing. Felt an unending sense of restlessness. Found it hard to think properly. Any of you feel that at all, on and off, maybe in your day-to-day life? Felt lonely, felt isolated, even why in the early stages of the pandemic, they were living with people constantly, yet felt isolated, felt miserable and unhappy. What was interesting is anxiety was up among parents, among students, among singles, amongst couples, amongst the employed, amongst job seekers, amongst house hunters and those who owned homes, amongst the old and amongst the young. It was in all play. Everybody was included. They end this study by saying this, and this is like, you're probably like, thanks for giving me anxiety for coming in today. Great start, man. I came for some hope. Easter's 2 weeks away. Blah. This is what they said. We're facing a national mental health crisis that could yield serious and social consequences for years to come. The consequences of living under this crushing weight and it casting us out into isolated places where we can't think and we're not sure how to thrive and interact and live, the consequences, we don't even know what they are yet, but we will when they hit, when they come crashing down on us and on our society and on our neighborhoods. That's what they said. So I want to kick us off with a question. If you're jumping in today for the first time, we do a couple questions on a morning, but here it is. Love to kick it off and love for you to think about this question. Anxiety is, if anything in today's conversation triggers a sense of I can't even be in the room, I want to encourage you to pull yourself back a little bit. Only engage as much as you can or you need to, but go as far as possible. Anxiety is, take a minute, turn to your neighbor. How would you answer that? What is anxiety? I gave some snapshots, but what would you tell someone? Or how do you answer it? Or how do you experience that? Anxiety is, you get about a minute and then we'll come back and we'll jump in.
Hello, anxiety, my old friend. I told you I didn't want to see you again. I thought I left you with a sweet goodbye, but you still come around here from time to time. The bus ride home cost you a little bit of your pride, and the city never looked quite as good as it did in yours. 'Cause you're a wanderer who understands the limits of time. And plans are just things that get you started, 'cause they'll shift on a dime. Life didn't quite go as you
All right, take a moment, wrap that up.
so
That sounds so weird coming out of my mouth. Take a moment and wrap that up. This big like cultural thing that we're individually wrestling with and that's increasing in all of our lives. But we'll come back to a few other questions throughout the morning as we think about what anxiety is. But we know this. If we gave time and we opened up and we all could share freely, we would know, regardless of our life stage, our age, our socioeconomic status, that anxiety is in and it's about things like our future. What's going to happen with our schooling and our employment, the security we feel in our finances, our investments, or the lack of investments we can make. So many things that comprise who we are. It clouds our thinking. And I want to say that anxiety, physiologically, mentally, it clouds our thinking. It changes the systems and the processes through which our brain is able to think clearly. It clouds our arteries, changes our ability to live and breathe and grow old and with energy. It clouds everything. One author said this. They said, I've learned that anxiety is a condition of the heart that gives rise to many other malfunctions or sins in our lives. Think for a moment how many different sinful actions and attitudes come from an anxious place. Anxiety about finances can give rise to coveting and greed and hoarding and stealing. Anxiety about succeeding at some task can make you irritable and abrupt and angry. Anxiety about relationships can make you withdrawn and indifferent and uncaring about other people or overly needy. Anxiety about how someone will respond to you can make you cover over the truth and lie and withhold necessary conversations. So if anxiety could be conquered, a mortal blow would be struck to so many of the malfunctions in life. With that backdrop, I maybe want to change the tune and just want to talk about this a little bit, put a little light on it. But I was thinking about anxiety and a few images to pull us in. This is me trying to do my calculations to prove that all my friends secretly hate me and are plotting against me. It's sort of an anxious way to live. Someone is late. Me, this is where my mind goes. Were we supposed to meet at this time? Is this really the place we're going to meet up? Is it actually Thursday today? Were we even meeting at Thursday? Do I actually know this person? Do they really exist? Do I exist? Can I ask you something? And my immediate reply says, go for it. But my mind has already gone through the 7 stages of grief, right? This is kind of how things work out for us. My anxiety, something is wrong. Me, what is it? My anxiety, something. Me, can you give me a general idea? My anxiety, something. Right? I am very laid back and I only care about 2 things. Every person on earth and their opinion of me and the crushing psychological weight of being alive. But then maybe this is how we think about it. When someone says don't be anxious and your anxiety is cured. Right? It doesn't work like that. But today we're going to hear those words. Don't be anxious. They're going to come right out of this letter to you and I. What do we do with that? When you tell people you have anxiety and can't do something and they tell you to just be positive and not think about it. Cured. And anxious people spent the day mentally preparing for a specific scenario to happen. And this is the scenario. You know, this is a real thing. And you and I need to have a conversation about it. And I think our Philippians text is going to speak to it for us. But first I want to say, our mission is to inspire people to follow Jesus and deepen their faith and relationship with him. And I want to go to some of the words of Jesus. Jesus spoke at length and directly about anxiety. He said some things like this. He talked about a seed. It was his teaching and his way of living that fell among a soil. And it says the seed that fell among the thorns. If you have a garden, you know what an issue it is when thorns and thistles start to grow up in it. He said it represents those who hear God's word. But all too quickly, the message is crowded out by the worries of this life and the lure of wealth. So no fruit is produced. And Jesus is speaking to some of us who are desiring to follow Jesus and have a deep, intimate, growing relationship with him. We feel like we're stalled all the time. And he goes, there's this there's these thorns and these weeds that crowd it out. He went on to say in the book of John, chapter 14, to his followers, he said, "Friends, peace I leave with you. My peace I give you. I do not give to you as the world gives. Do not let your hearts be troubled, and do not be afraid." Isn't that interesting? Jesus looking you and I, looking into our soul and saying, don't let your heart be troubled. Doesn't that feel a little low on the emotional intelligence scale? Our hearts are troubled. It's just kind of part of life. He goes on and he says this about anxiety as he's teaching about his ethic and his kingdom and how to live. He says, "Therefore I tell you, do not be anxious about your life." And I go, come on, can't you qualify that a little bit? Anxious about, can I have some things I'm allowed to grab hold of and be anxious about? And then he explains why. He gives the why, which is so important when you're communicating something. He says, "Which of you by being anxious can add a single hour to his span of life?" And he's basically highlighting that the formula is broken. Anxiety tells us it's going to help us thrive and live and grow and keep us safe and hedge us in and protect us. But Jesus says, actually, it won't. The phrase "can add a single hour," actually think of like building a sandcastle. It's this picture that says, can actually add a cubit, can add any more volume to your life. Your life can't, anxiety is not going to give your life any more volume. It's actually going to shrink it down and take it away. That's Jesus speaking right there. And so we're stuck with, what do we do? Is this it's a little song I wrote and I'd like to sing it note by note. Don't worry, be happy. Is that what we're stuck with today? Okay, so we're going to jump into Philippians. We're in our final 2 weeks. I'm going to read as we're towards the end of the letter. If you have your Philippians journals or you have your Bible with you want to open it up, and because we're just walking through a few verses today, we're going to explore what Paul said to this church that was trying to follow Jesus and living with anxiety about how to live. And so we're going to be in Philippians chapter 4, and I'm going to start us actually in verse 6. Unfortunately, I'm jumping over a fantastic section. I hope you'll go back and read verses 1 to 5. They talk about things like rejoice always. I'll say it again, rejoice. There's this language about life, but let's get to verse 6. Pick up where Jesus leaves off. Paul says, now keep in mind, this was a letter. It would have been read to a group of people trying to figure out how to follow Jesus. Probably in your living room, they would have sat together and they would have rolled the letter open and they would have read it start to finish. It's not a textbook. It's not a study guide. It's not a list of popular phrases. It was someone's heart poured out through the divine direction of God to speak truth to a group of people. So verse 6, do not be anxious about anything, but in everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. And the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. And finally, brothers, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is commendable, if there's any excellence, if there is anything worth of praise, think about these things. And what you have learned and received and heard and seen in me, practice these things. And listen, and the God of peace will be with you. The God of peace will be with you. We're going to move through and just look for an incredibly formulaic way to think about anxiety, but I want to give you a challenge. Test it. Before you disregard it, before you maybe say, I've tried it, doesn't work, put it to the test. We're going to see some of the things that happen as Paul says, do not be anxious about anything, but in everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. And he unfolds this big picture about how you and I can approach life. We can let it go. We can release it by prayer, by supplication, by thanksgiving. Let your requests be made known. But there's a challenge for us because here's what happens. Like someone just throw out something that might make you anxious. Oh, yeah. Oh, hold on. Work, okay? Yeah, work. What else? Finances. Kids. I'm going to throw it in there. Church. Like, there's things that make us, right, church? Spring cleaning and gardening. Is our car going to break down? Am I aging well? What's going on with on and on. We could you think about it. Like, this is what happens in our life. And here's how we start to approach life. We start to go, okay, I'm about to see Wendy, so I don't want her to know. I don't want her to know, and I'm constantly trying to pull. I lost my wedding ring. That's a stressor. I'm constantly, hold on. We're gonna put that one in my pocket. I'm constantly trying, and here's what life feels like. Like this thing could just fill up with anxiety, things that make us anxious, things that are out of our control. Almost everything's out of your control except how you respond to it. And here we are, like, I don't want you to know. So I push it down, but every time I push it down, what does it do? It just pops back up. It pops back up. And so Paul's offering a solution, a way of thinking. Jesus brings to us something that's a little different, which is going to be to say, to look at this and go, this is just my life. There's no benefit in doing this because this isn't real. This is just not an ongoing, never-ending action that never produces a result that's any good. Just let it be. So what do you do? Now, it's not like, so when I meet with Wendy's like, hey, Carlos, how you doing? I'm like, blah, here's blah. And she's like, what's good? Like, hold some back, man. Tell me something. Paul's not saying just walk around and throw all your anxiety on everybody all the time. But what he is saying that's really interesting, if you look at this text, don't be anxious about anything, but in everything by prayer. And we're going to be introduced to this idea that these are real things. I can't come in here today and say, stop this. It doesn't work. It doesn't work in my life. I don't think it works in yours. But I can give you an invitation to maybe say, there's a better way. Paul's going to give us a better way to take these things and to, instead of trying to push them down, to let them be, and to even begin to lift them up, to pray. He's very pointed and he's very concrete here in how he approaches this. Don't be anxious about anything. And this is a phrase that means don't be anxious about anything. There's no secret language to it. There's no hidden meaning. It's anything in your life. By trying to push it down, to suppress it, to hold it, to control it, you're going to find that the feeling and the physiological sense of anxiety is going to increase, and your thinking is going to get crowded, and your living is going to get clouded, and it's going to become difficult. So he says, don't be anxious about anything. But you and I both know, but that's not true. I'm anxious about things. I'm anxious if I can make it all the way through the morning without having to use the bathroom. I have to make a decision every morning. Like, can I go to the sermon now or should I run down the hall? And what if I'm late? And who's going to, like, well, there's just things you can't control, right? 2 sausages at the barbecue, and all of a sudden I'm having, I think, a heart attack on my way to the hospital. Your kids, do you know, parents who've raised kids, how much do you get to control what happens with them? Like 0. Well, that's bad news for all you parents of young kids, right? And your finances. I've told you, my son was a master in crypto the last 4 years. He lost his mastery because crypto took a little dive. Everyone was crushing it the last 4 years. If you jumped into day trading then, watch out for the next decade. Things might be a little different. Like, you can't control the movement of these things. So Paul says, and let's walk through, he's going to give us a few things to do. And the first is this: pray. I don't want to pass by this. I don't want to understate this. I want to say that right, like grassroots to where you and I live, he's saying you got to pray. You got to take these things and you just lift them up. You lift them up, but there's a few things he talks about here. And one of them, when he says pray, and he talks through what that looks like to pray, we see Peter, one of Paul's friends, say something similar. Listen how Peter talks about it. Cast all your anxiety on him, on Jesus, because he cares for you. Pray. And these men, they knew the Psalms, the poems written about God. Listen to one of them. This is Psalm 55. This is the shadow of this is in the language of their words. Listen to my prayer, O God. Please don't ignore me. Hear me and answer me. My thoughts trouble me, and I am distraught. Because of what my enemy is saying, see, people are talking about me, and it's causing me some anxiety, and there's threats against me. They're trying to bring down suffering on me. There's anger projected towards me. Listen to the intensity of the feeling of this poet. My heart is in anguish within me. Does that feel like an anxious place? A heart that's full of anguish, and the terrors of death have fallen on me. Fear and trembling have beset me. Horror has overwhelmed me. It almost feels like I'm making this up. How far can they go? It's got the thesaurus out. Like, what's another word for how bad things are? But listen to the final verse of this poem. Cast your cares on the Lord, and he will sustain you. He will never let you be shaken. Cast your cares on the Lord, and he will sustain you. He will never let you be shaken. And so pray. Don't be anxious about anything, but in everything pray, and with supplication and thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. And it's this big prayer bucket, and I just want to give you 4 things to think about with prayer. They may not be natural for you. You might have already mastered them, and you feel like it's part of your life and the rhythm of your life. This is very interesting. There's been a report put out this year that said people who engage in active, personal, regular prayer and Bible reading handled the pandemic the best emotionally. It's a very interesting data point. It's not from a religious study, it's from the Pew Group. Think about that. And so with that on my mind, how do you pray? Well, the first one, pray, is actually a word very uncommon to like an American or a non-denominational church practice, but it means pray with intention and rhythm. Pray at the same time and in the same place every day so you know it's coming. So you know it's coming. Say, I get up, I wake up, I do this, I do that, and then I pray. And I know that place is going to be there. The word refers to a special time of prayer, which was much more common in more ancient religious practice and more orthodox religious practice, but a special, specific time of prayer. So the first thing I want to encourage you with is find a time, just try. If you're feeling anxiety, just say, I'm going to find a place and a time every day I pray. And maybe it's just a minute. I'm not telling you to go for an hour, but maybe it can grow. And it can be that place. And when you find that time and place, because we talk a lot here about just always conversing and talking with God, but when you're feeling anxiety, that anxiety is fighting with you to talk with God. And this is where you pause and you go, right now it's me and the God who will not let me down. We're talking. This is what we do. It's like a date. And what do you do in that space? So you pray with intention and rhythm. That's the first word, pray. And then he goes on, he says, supplicate. Who's used the word supplicate in the last week? I haven't. If you have, good on you. It just means to ask with intensity and honesty. To supplicate means that prayer you have is focused on a special need, a deep, intense. This is, some people might go, but that's so selfish. God doesn't want to know that. There's issues in the world bigger than my issues. Maybe the issues are what's on your heart. Or maybe it's just something small, like you got a creak in your knee and it's worrying you if you're going to be able to mountain bike this season. Don't limit what that can be. Supplicate, ask with intensity and honesty. And then he goes on, I love this. You do it with thanksgiving, though. Because griping and complaining are easy for us. So you don't say, God, why not? And where are you? And you pause and you think, anyone who's followed Jesus for a time, you know you have things in your life that you can say, thank you, God. Thank you again and again and again. If your list is small, make a small list and repeat it over and over and over. And watch, it will grow. Because the third thing, the Thanksgiving piece, is to thank God for who he is and what he has done, to remember well. So you've got set a time and place, bring your specific things, give thanks. And the last part of Paul's anecdote here is request exactly what is needed. He says, let your requests be made known to God. The word for that it's specific and definite, not God, will you please be with my kid? But it's Heavenly Father, you know my son. You know he's struggling to make friends at school. And will you please bring someone into his life today to remind him that he's not specific? Pray. That's the first thing Paul lays out. What he's advocating for is a practice of living that can hold and sustain the freight of life. This is the freight. There's a lot of it. And just over and over, we lift it up. We supplicate. We give, you don't have to use that word, by the way. We give thanks. We bring our requests to God because life is full of making good decisions or bad decisions, and anxiety clouds our ability to know the difference between the two. So we are given this rhythm to live into. Pray, specific. Supplicate, get real about what it is. Thanksgiving, remember where God's been faithful. Request, give all the details about where you are, what you need, and what you see. That's what Paul says. So it starts with pray, and then he goes on and says, and the peace of God which surpasses all understanding. Wait, time out. There's a benefit to this rhythm. Paul says, guess what? Friends, now remember where he's writing this from. Prison. He's not out doing the stuff he loves. The people he loves are being oppressed and put to death, and Paul's worried and he's in prison. He knows his own death is coming. He's been shipwrecked, hungry, starved, naked, beaten nearly to death. So from that place, Paul says, if you do this, guess what? The peace of God. And you know what's unique about the peace of God? It's got no limits, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. You know, I've thought a lot about this phrase right here, guard your hearts. Paul's been under guard for several years. He's every day of his life, a guard has been posted next to him in his life, making sure he does what he's supposed to do, making sure he doesn't get out of line. And he's writing, he's like, friends, guess what? God is going to give you a peace that will guard your heart. It's going to be in your face all the time. But it's good in your face. It's what you need in your face. It keeps you from pushing things down, and it allows you to lift them up. And so I want to say something to you this way. Your heart is only as safe as what or who is guarding it. Your heart is only as safe as what or who is guarding it. And Paul says this habit of prayer, it will bring you to an experience called the peace of God. And in that place, your heart is safe. And it's, to oversimplify it, and it looks like this. Take your anxiety up. Take it up. Don't stop. Take it up. Do it on a rhythm. Make a habit of it. Take it up. Even if it's through tears and clenched fists and you're on your knees and you feel like the world's crashing in, you don't stop. You just take it up. You take it up, and his promise is that the peace of God will come down. I know it doesn't always work out like that. I know very faithful people who would say, been there, man, the peace didn't come down. And the only thing I could say is keep taking it up. I'm with you. You're not alone. But keep taking it up. I want to ask you a question. What guards your heart personally? And do you feel safe? Be honest when you answer this. What guards your heart? If you can't talk about it, just write it down somewhere, pop open a note. If you're sitting next to someone you can be a little vulnerable with, or if you're just ready to make new friends, be vulnerable with them, you can turn and say like this. So go ahead, let's answer that. What guards your heart? Do you feel safe? We'll be back in a minute.
Tell me you love me, that I'm not alone. Say that you want me, that you'll never let go. I can be so forgetful. It's not what I intend. So could you remind me again and again?
We're going to turn the corner and end with an exciting baptism today, but I want to stack the third piece on here, and it's just simply this. It's pray. It's pray. And then he turns and he says, think. There's not a lot to say about this. He doesn't overcomplicate it. He says, finally, brothers, whatever's true, whatever's honorable, whatever's just, whatever's pure, whatever's lovely, whatever's commendable, if there's is any excellence, if there's anything worthy of praise, think about these things. So he sets them up with a way to encounter God daily, an honest approach to lifting up the things that we want to push down. And he goes, but remember, all day long, you gotta think. All day long, you're gonna have to think. You're gonna have to cast your anxiety up, and once you cast your anxiety up, while you're doing that, you've got to continually think about whatever's honorable, just, pure, lovely, commendable, excellent, worthy of praise. Just write that list down. If you're struggling with your thoughts, just write those words down and throw it on your mirror, in your car, put it as a screensaver on your phone, and just check yourself. And this is a discipline. Because remember, we've talked about the brain. It's a stinker. The brain wants to do the opposite of all these things. It's a fight or flight system. The brain wants to assume you're about to be attacked by a bear at the grocery store any minute. That's where it wants to go. So you wrestle it down by thinking, you pray, you think. There's not much more to say there. I just want to encourage you with this. Philippians 4:8. And then Paul ends it and he goes, listen, you pray, you think, and you do. It's three things to at least try to live within this anxious world we're in. Pray, think, and do. And here's what I mean. What you've learned and received and heard and seen in me. It's a community statement. It's a mentoring statement. It's living life with people who are modeling these things. What you've seen in me, practice these things. And look how he ends it. And the God of peace will be with you. What you have learned in me, practice. Now there's a phrase that's sometimes attributed to the Navy SEALs. I can't quite find the original use of it. It shows up in several special forces. You've probably seen it in like a business or motivational class, but slow is smooth and smooth is fast. And this is what Paul's saying. He's saying, listen, if you don't practice this rhythm, if you don't intentionally think about these things, your life is going to be like that time when you're hurried and you're rushed. And have you ever got anyone who said I had to public speak and you get up to public speak and all of a sudden your throat goes totally dry in your mouth and you can't say anything? Like, it's because you're at a place of, this is another way to think about that phrase. You're at a place of unconscious incompetence. Paul wants to move everyone who wants to follow Jesus from unconscious incompetence to unconscious competence. That's a lot of syllables in here. I'm going to make it simple. Anyone who's mastered anything knows this, whether it's an activity, a hobby, a field. Anyone who can do something and you know you're good at it. You didn't start there. When you started, you didn't even know how bad you were at it because you never had started. You were unconsciously incompetent at it. But then you worked. You pray, you think, and then you do. And you become consciously incompetent. You become aware that you're not good at it. But that's not the goal. That's not mastery. That's not living. That's just being aware what you're not good at. But then there's a corner you turn and you become conscious in your competence. By thinking about it, you can do it. Think about a time to pray. Think about supplication. Think about thanksgiving. Think about requests. Do it over and over and over and over and over. As long as you and I ever see each other, back and do it over and over and what? And then you get to the slow is fast. Slow is smooth and smooth is fast. You get to unconscious competence. You don't have to think about it. It just happens in your life. It becomes a rhythm. So how do I know I'll be okay though? Like how do I know? Why can I trust this system? Why does Paul have the right to say, don't be anxious, friends? And it's because Paul knows that Jesus is strong enough. He knows it. And he knows that not only is he strong enough, he's loving enough because he's experienced it. And he's wise enough to walk us through this life. And I'm going to end with a story to set up our baptism. Some of you know this story of Unbroken, Louis Zamperini. This was a guy who overcame everything. Stuff you and I can't and won't and should never have to overcome. He was an Olympian in college, ran the 5,000, came in 8th. Hitler congratulated him and said, man, you are fast. He responded by trying to sneak into Hitler's compound and steal his flag. He was shot at and ran away. And so Louis, as a teenager, as a wild man, goes off to college. They think he's the first runner who's going to get below a sub 4-minute mile, the next Olympics. It's on the way, and then World War II starts. World War II starts, and he ends up, his plane goes down, and he's lost at sea with 3 other soldiers, almost 50 days, stranded at sea, no food. They said sharks were just following them along. One of the men he was stranded with died. They watched him die from starvation. They all got below 100 pounds, and then they were rescued. Well, not rescued, they were found by Japanese soldiers. And Louis was put into, as a time of war, he was put into a camp for prisoners of war. And in that place, he met the butcher and the bird. These were 2 soldiers because Louis was kind of a celebrity. He was an Olympian. He was probably potentially the fastest person on the planet in the mile. Because of that, they didn't kill him, but they made an example of him over and over and over. They had beat him to a point where he had nothing left, and then they'd make him run against some other soldiers to prove how he wasn't as fast as they were, and he would win, and they would beat him some more. What Louis went through was horrendous. He was forced to eat food filled with maggots. Over 200 POWs had to punch him in the face repeatedly or they would be killed. His friends, they were psychologically impressing upon Louis that he was nothing. Then he was rescued and he went home, a hero with an incredible story. And if you've seen Angelina Jolie's Unbroken story, all the faith has been scrubbed out of it. It's just a story of this amazing person who, over the human tenacity to overcome everything, except even though Louis could overcome all those things, he couldn't overcome his anxiety. He couldn't overcome the PTSD and the consequences of his experience. He became an addict. He survived, but he was broken. Every area of his life was consumed with trauma, depression, anxiety, a desire for revenge, hatred, and fear. And then his wife, when things were really bad, she woke up one night and in a traumatic episode, he was choking her in bed. She was pregnant with their child, and not long after, when their child was born, he was aggressive and couldn't handle the noise of the child. And she didn't know what to do, and they went to a Billy Graham, if you know the name. They went to a Billy Graham crusade, where Billy is a guy who talked about Jesus to huge crowds for years. And Billy said to the audience, "You are not sufficient." And the lie of anxiety is that you are sufficient, you just can't figure it out. So the anxiety grows and grows and grows. Billy said, "You're not sufficient," and Louis got up and left. He's like, "What? 50 days at sea, 2 years as a POW, survived it all? You want to tell me I'm not sufficient?" But he went back. And when we went back the next day, Billy said this. He said, "Some of you are drowning, lost at sea, and you have no resources to save you." And it clicked. And he said, "And Jesus is the only one who will rescue you. He beat death because he is strong. And he did it because he is loving." And so Louis left that crusade, and this is what Laura Hillebrand, who wrote his second story, Unbroken, which is the most popular version, said. "Resting in the shade and the stillness, Louis felt profound peace. And when he thought about his history, what resonated with him now was not all that he had suffered, but the divine love that he believed was with him. He was not worthless, broken, forsaken. He was not a man that the bird, that was his torture, had striven to make of him. And in a single silent moment, his rage, his fear, his humiliation, and helplessness had fallen away. Somebody who had overcome the hardest things anyone would ever encounter was still filled with these things. And that morning he believed he was a new creation, and softly he wept. Louis lived into his early 90s. Even at one point, the bird, who was a war criminal, reemerged as a successful businessman, and Louis over and over reached out to him to reconcile. The bird never would, but he reached out to say, "I forgive you for what you did. I understand it was war. I just want you to know." That's how whole he had become. In a single silent moment, everything changed, and he could begin to lift it up instead of push it down. So here's your closing question before our baptism. What is making you anxious? Take a single silent moment and cast it on God. Jesus is strong enough. Jesus is loving enough. Take a moment of prayer. If you want to fill out one of those red prayer cards in front of you so we can join you in prayer, you can put it in the boxes in the back. But take a moment, just pray over this question. Well, we have a beautiful picture of the strength and the love of Jesus that wants to meet you in the place of your anxiety. It's baptism. And so we're going to hear her story. And if you've never seen baptism before, it's a picture of new life, being born again. And hear her story, and then we sing a closing song. So I hope you enjoy that. Go ahead and pay attention to the screen. You'll see Lindsay's story.
Hi, Easton family. My name is Lindsay, and I am so excited to be getting baptized today. I grew up in a not religious family, but was invited by some neighbors to go to Awana when I was about 5 years old. And ever since that first interaction of just memorizing Bible verses, getting to know who Jesus was, and that just base level of faith, I was fully fledged and just wanted to know more. And so continued going to church my whole life up until I got to about high school age, where I sort of started to question things a bit. And then as I stepped into college, just really reignited my faith again. And for the past however many years since college, I have just really grown closer with my relationship to God. And I have decided to make this next step. So I moved from the Midwest to Boise just before the pandemic hit in late 2019. And so right as I started getting settled here is when everything started to shut down. So a lot of that time was spent just sort of virtually watching church, but with the desire to get involved in a community and really find that church family again that I knew and loved from my childhood and my adult life. And so once things started opening back up, we had come across Eastwind virtually, started listening in virtually, and decided, we just got to go on a Sunday. And we did, and we just felt so welcomed to be here. And so we've been here about a month now, and just really enjoying our time, and can see the community that we will get to build here. I have decided to get baptized mostly because it's been on my heart for a few years, and I was just waiting for that community and that church home in this new city for me to be able to establish that next step in my faith. And so it's been on my heart, and I'm looking forward to professing my faith and getting to take this next step in my relationship with God.
All right, so I'm over in this corner. Lindsay, we'll have her on the screen. It's funny because normally our baptism videos are a little shorter, but you were the only one today, so we went longer. She's been sitting in this cold water, just like waiting and waiting. So here's the rules, all right? Lindsay and I are going to have a brief conversation, going to baptize her. When that's done, I want to invite you to put your hands together, stand to your feet, and we're going to go into a closing song that's our baptism celebration. Lindsay, thanks for being bold and for being here and climbing in this space in front of really a community that you and Will are entering into, and we're so glad you're here. But I just have one question for you. Do you believe that Jesus is strong enough for anything that will come in your life? And do you believe he's loving enough?
Yes.
Yeah, he's strong and he's loving. He's God himself. And so do you believe he died on the cross, was buried, rose again, set the world straight for you and me?
Yes.
Well, it's that simple, Lindsay. Then I baptize you in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit.